You are going to be on the top of page 36. And on page 36, and we're writing it on the right-hand side because we glued in our other stuff on the left-hand side. On the top of page 36, adding and subtracting decimals. These are your problems for this anchor chart. I want you to write them down on your whiteboard, just like I have them written here. And I want you to think about when we were solving the addition and subtraction problems, what we did to start off. What did we do? What was the very first thing that we did? We lined up our numbers by place value, right? We can't subtract hundreds from tens or add hundreds to tens. We have to line them up by place value and add up the same columns. So we do the same thing with our decimals. Our very first step is going to be to line them up. And what exactly is them? If we have these numbers, what would we be lining up? We would be lining up the place value. But what forces our place value to get in order? We do this when we are comparing decimals. We line them up. What do we line up? We line up the decimals. So that's our very first step. We line them up. Them is the decimals. Okay? So we line them up. Our first problem, we had 1 and 4/10 plus 6 and 75 hundredths. So we are going to line them up. And if you switch these two, because we're adding, it's not going to change the outcome of our problem, okay? So if you're like, oh, I switched them, that's totally fine when we are adding. Got it? So the first thing we did was we lined them up, okay? And then we have our subtraction problem, which we had 15 and 1/10 minus 7 and 95 hundredths. So we are going to write this and we're going to line them up. On this problem, it does matter, because in our problem where it's going horizontally, this one comes first. That means this is either what we have or what there is, and this is what we're taking away. Okay? It could be the same thing up here, but when you're adding, you're putting them together. When you're subtracting, you're taking them away. And right now we can't take 15 away from 7, okay? So we line them up. Now that we've lined them up, right? The next thing that we're going to do is we are going to drop it down. Well, what is it? If we lined them up, now we're going to drop it down. What do you think it is? Our numbers, our answers, our decimal? It's going to be our decimal, because the number one mistake that my 5th graders love to make is we totally forget the decimal. So that's why it's step number 2. We don't even start the math process until the decimal is down, so we know where it is. Okay? So our step number 2 is drop it down. It being the decimal. So we lined them up, and now we're going to drop down the decimal. So we don't forget it. We do the same thing on our subtraction problem. We're getting closer. We're getting closer to being able to solve this. The next thing that we're going to do is we lined them up, meaning our decimals. That's the only way that we can add and subtract is if we line them up. And then we drop it down. We drop the decimal down so we don't forget about it, because we'll probably forget about it. So we drop the decimal down. The next thing we're going to do is the right marker. We are going to fill them in. And the them in this is going to be the empty spaces on our problems. We're going to fill them in with what's a good placeholder that doesn't change the value of our numbers if it's behind the decimal. It's a 0. So we are going to put zeros where there is no space. Could we put one here? Yes, but there's nothing in front of 7, so we don't have to do that. But we put them in where there's other place values underneath it when we're adding and subtracting. Okay, so we did all this work and we're good. We're done. We lined them up, we dropped it down, we filled them in, we just did math. No, we have to do what? What's the final thing we have to do in math? Begins with an S and ends with an alv. Step 4 says we have got to solve them. And if you have room on the bottom, definitely write it on the bottom, but I don't have any room, so I wrote it on the side. So we are going to solve them. Well, we are adding. We're doing like all the things that we normally do on a regular problem. We're observing what we see. We're adding, which means my value should get bigger, right? Like my answer should be larger than these two numbers that I'm given. Well, when we add, we always start in the smallest place value, which is either on the right or on the left. Our small place values are where? They're on the right. And so we're going to start over here. We have 0 plus 5. I get 5. Then I go to my 10th place. I have 4 plus 7. I have 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I regroup. That means I have 11 tenths. 11 tenths is really what? 1 and 1/10. That's why I carry the 1, because I'm regrouping it to the ones place. It's 1 whole and 1/10, so I have to regroup it. Then I'm going to add 6 plus 1 is 7, plus 1 is 8. My answer is 8 and 15 hundredths. Over here, I'm going to do the same thing, except I'm going to observe and I'm subtracting. I already did all my work. I lined everything up. I dropped down the decimal and I filled it in. So now I'm going to subtract. Well, if I have 0, can I give you anything? I don't have any money. And you say, let me borrow $5. And I say, okay, I don't have anything to give you, so no. What I have to do is I have to go borrow or regroup from the 10th place. So I'm going to take my 1/10, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to break it up into how many pieces? 100. So this turns to a 0. And now I have 10 hundredths. I go 10 minus 5 is 5. 0 minus 9, I can't do it. Have to regroup and borrow. 0 minus 9, oh yeah, I have to put my 1 there. 10 minus 9 is 1. 4 minus 7, I can't do it. I have to regroup and borrow. So I put 10, I borrow a group of 10. And this becomes 14 minus 7 is 7. My answer is 7 and 15 hundredths. When you're adding and subtracting decimals, you're really just adding and subtracting whole numbers. But you're remembering to take care of the decimals first so that it feels like that. So what we do, we have to line them up because we have to get everything in place value order, just like when we're adding and subtracting regularly. Then we have to drop the decimal down so that we don't forget about it when we're rushing through our math. So we drop our decimal down and then we solve it. And when we solve it and we get our answer, we already have the decimal down here, so we don't have 715, which means that doesn't even make sense. I can't take 15 wholes and subtract 7 and get 715. That's way, 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 way too big. Same thing over here. If I didn't have my decimal, I would have 815. I can't add 1 and 6 and get 800 wholes. That doesn't make sense. So we make sure that we drop the decimal down and then we carry on with math exactly how it is without changing anything or doing anything different. Okay, so we line up the decimals first. Step 1 is we line up the decimals and then we drop it down, it being the decimal. Then we fill in the holes where there's nothing. We put a 0, so we have a placeholder, because like here, what some of you would have done was not put anything here and then said it was 5, which in this case it works out. But what if this was 3? You would have said it was 3 when really it would have been 7. Okay, so we put in our placeholders and then we solve it. We make sure we're observing what our operation is and then we're taking care of business. So this shouldn't be too overwhelming because you should know how to add and subtract whole numbers. We're going to come back and we're going to practice a lot of this. So please make sure your journal is ready to go. Make sure you have your whiteboards and your markers. Got it?